Tonight on Bridge City News, police in Lethbridge comment on the recent crime spree in our city involving guns and knives. Alberta Premier Jason Kenney expresses his concerns to Prime Minister Justin Trudeau over our province's beleaguered energy sector. And police in the United Kingdom found the bodies of 39 people in a truck container. We have the details.
Your nation, your province, your southern Alberta. From the heart of Lethbridge, it's Bridge City News with Hal Robbins.
Good evening. Thanks so much for joining us. There appears to be an increase in crime in Lethbridge over the past few weeks. We've brought you stories of knife threats, a gun being fired, attempted child abductions. We've also received a report now of an incident at the main branch of the Lethbridge Public Library last night about a customer who was brandishing a firearm. The police held a media event earlier today to update us on what's been going on in our city. Ainsley O'Reilly spoke to the police and someone who was a recent victim of crime right here in Lethbridge.
Although a report of a firearm at Lethbridge Public Library Monday evening turned out to be a false alarm, Lethbridge Police hosted a press conference Tuesday afternoon to address a series of violent crimes that have been happening in our city this week. I spoke to a man this afternoon who says that yesterday evening he was held at knife point in his own vehicle.
Quickly tried to slide my door to unlock to get out because I had my hands on the keys. I figured the first thing is get out of the vehicle, and I missed the lock. The guy got mad. I told him I'll start it, and he kept yelling at me, and then he moved the knife a little bit forward and I grabbed it out of his hands. And then as I grabbed it, I looked, and then he turned and he had a second knife, and he said, "This time I'm going to kill you. Drive." The guy, Brady, who was chasing him, caught up and basically got him to get out of my vehicle. So Brady's my hero. He saved me.
The incident took place on 27th and 3rd Avenue South in Lethbridge. Although witnesses tried to follow the perpetrator, they were not successful. Police say they are doing everything they can to target erratic and life-threatening situations like these.
We are developing a strategy that's, we actually had some good meetings on it yesterday, in fact, to address the behaviors we're seeing within the community, redeploying some resources and aggressively attacking these behaviors, and we're hoping to have something implemented here in the near future.
Mayor Chris Spearman was present and provided a statement.
We as City Council are frustrated too. Those people who are a danger to our great city need to be off our streets. We will not tolerate the notion that criminals can continuously victimize law-abiding citizens and get away with it.
And as for Rick Neudorf,
life does go on. I don't think I realized how severe the situation could be until after it happened.
For Bridge City News, I'm Ainsley O'Reilly.
RCMP and Fort Macleod have laid charges in connection with a turkey farm protest. On September 2nd, police were dispatched to a rural property in response to a large gathering of people who were protesting at a turkey farm on the Jumbo Valley Hutterite colony. Once police arrived, they located several people who entered the barn illegally. 46-year-old Maxwell Ma from Edmonton, 28-year-old Claire Buchanan from Calgary, 24-year-old Kennedy Herbert from Pincher Creek, and a 16-year-old Calgary female have all been charged with one count of break and enter to commit mischief. All four have been released from custody and will be in court in Fort Macleod on November the 15th. 3 Lethbridge residents recently returned from a 2-week deployment with the Disaster Response Organization to help with recovery efforts in the Bahamas following Hurricane Dorian. BCN's Loris Alexander spoke with them about their experiences.
There are vehicles overturned, houses ripped apart, roofs gone, twisted metal. It looked like bombs had gone off.
The chilling description of the scene of destruction, which greeted 3 Lethbridge disaster relief volunteers in the Bahamas following Hurricane Dorian last month.
We did some training before we went down, and the individual skill level here does prepare you to some degree, but when you're standing in such an affected, disaster-ridden area, you still look around and you take pause about how much people are going to have to do to reclaim their lives and to rebuild their lives. It'll take generations probably for these people.
Dorian was the most intense tropical cyclone on record to strike the Bahamas and cause catastrophic damage in early September, with at least 61 people killed and hundreds still missing.
What struck me is so quiet. There was no one on the road. The roads were torn up, but there was no one on the roads. There was the utter devastation. It's kind of like apocalyptic meets Wild West. That's really what it looked like. And the smell of rot, the smell of decay, the smell of mold, the smell of, well, the smell of a death of a life, I would say, of lives.
Another volunteer, Eric Foster, says it was difficult to take in the scale of the tragedy they were dealing with. Now back in Lethbridge, Foster says it's necessary to put his emotions to one side.
It was surreal. Words can't really describe what we saw. No matter where you look, there was damage to some degree, whether it was a roof being ripped off or a second floor being completely gone or an entire buildings being gone. Areas that we were in, the storm surge ranged from probably around 7 feet to about 25 feet. We heard waves about 40 feet. Wind meters were broken on the island, approaching 300 miles an hour. So it's real hard to describe, but it's destruction no matter where you looked.
For Bridge City News, I'm Loris Alexander.
Police in the United Kingdom have launched a murder investigation after 39 people were found dead in a truck container. Authorities say they were found in an industrial park in Essex, which is located about 30 kilometers east of London. One of the victims was a teenager and what is suspected as a human trafficking ring. Police say the Bulgaria-registered vehicle had entered the UK through a Welsh port over the weekend. Police later said only the truck and not the container had originated in Northern Ireland. The 25-year-old Northern Irish truck driver was arrested on suspicion of murder. British Prime Minister Boris Johnson called for the crime's perpetrators to be hunted down and brought to justice. This isn't the first time there's been a tragedy in Europe involving human trafficking. 4 human traffickers were given life sentences earlier this summer in the deaths of 71 migrants whose bodies were found in an abandoned truck in Austria in 2015. Alberta Premier Jason Kenney and Saskatchewan Premier Scott Moe say Justin Trudeau's support for the West should be more than lip service, or there will be lasting damage to national unity. The Liberals failed to win any seats in either Alberta or Saskatchewan. Premier Moe says Trudeau should cancel the carbon tax, rework equalization, and get oil pipelines to open up to international markets. One of our political contributors, Brian Lilly, says the feelings of Western alienation and separation are being heard in central Canada. The voices are not just coming from Alberta, but from Saskatchewan as well.
Saskatchewan Premier Scott Moe says there's a prairie fire burning that Trudeau needs to put out. And in his letter says, I've given you the fire extinguisher. Look after our concerns. But I'm not sure that the people in power will get that. And I'm definitely convinced that the coalition partners that Justin Trudeau is going to have to look for will not get that. They believe no more pipelines, leave the oil in the ground.
Catch the full interview with Mr. Lilly discussing how a Liberal minority government would work with Conservative premiers across Canada. That interview is coming up in the second half of our show. Premier Jason Kenney says he expressed his concerns to Prime Minister Justin Trudeau regarding our province's energy industry, and now he has the full support of many other premiers across the country.
Our approach is to defend our vital economic interests, and that may require some a give and take with the federal government. I would also point out to the Prime Minister that on many of the issues I've spoken about, we have the support of all or most of the provinces. 9 of 10 opposed to Bill C-69. Several provinces opposed to the application of the carbon tax. 9 of 10 provinces in favor of energy and resource corridors, including oil and gas pipelines. So, you know, together with trying to have taken a constructive role with Ottawa, we've also tried to build a pan-Canadian coalition that reflects our interests.
Federal Conservative leader Andrew Scheer says he hears the struggles the prairie provinces are going through, and he will bring those concerns to Prime Minister Justin Trudeau in Ottawa.
So my message to the people of Alberta and Saskatchewan is we hear you loud and clear. We will fight for you. We will do everything we can to make sure that this Liberal government understands that it has to change course. It cannot continue to attack our energy sector, to kill big projects that get our natural resources around the world, and that we will do everything we can to get our energy sector back on its feet and make sure that all Canadians understand that when Western Canada succeeds, all Canadians succeed. Manufacturing jobs in Ontario and Quebec rely on a growing energy sector. Refinery jobs in Atlantic Canada depend on a strong and vibrant energy sector. We will do that very important work. We will be that strong voice. This is the first step.
NDP leader Jagmeet Singh says he was inspired by the people he met along the campaign trail. He says he will fight for Canadians' interests in Parliament, where the Liberals will need support from other parties to govern with a minority.
This campaign has truly been an honor. I'm so thankful for the chance to be able to have traveled across this country, met so many Canadians, heard their stories, and talked about solutions to the problems they're faced with. The number of kids that came up to me telling me that they felt inspired, that they felt like they belonged, that seeing our campaign, they felt like they could do anything in their life is something I'm never going to forget, and is something that reminds me of why we do what we do, to inspire people to dream bigger.
A new member of Parliament from New Brunswick, who once stated she wanted to become Prime Minister, says she's not looking to lead her party, at least not just yet. Jenica Atwin pulled out a historic win on Monday night, becoming the first Green MP east of British Columbia. She says she's looking forward to learning as much as she can from Green Party leader Elizabeth May.
I think it'll be a steep learning curve, but I'm ready for the challenge. And yeah, it's certainly great to say I'm the member of Parliament. We expected a win, we wanted to win, but just it's still shocking because this is all just so new, and it's so validating as well. So I was just so happy. I think that's really what my expressions were giving off last night. So I've got a lot of media contacts today to make sure we really connect with everyone out there and let them know how excited we are and how happy we are. I've got a call with Elizabeth coming up as well, so it'll be a lot of questions to see what's next and what she wants of her latest MP to join her caucus.
Closer to home, there is good news for those who use Whoop Up Drive Lethbridge on a regular basis. The city says by the end of day Saturday, crews are expected to finish up bridge coating. Contractors will reduce westbound Whoop Up Drive to one lane to remove the construction barriers. On Friday night, eastbound traffic will be reduced to one lane as well to remove those barriers. Each year, communities across the country recognize the third week of October as Waste Reduction Week. Environment Lethbridge honors those who've had a big impact to improve both the environment and our community. These people are known as green superheroes.
This year we had some great both businesses and individuals who've been recognized, including a young woman named Sydney, who helped organize the climate strike at the end of September. And so she's a high school student. She took that on all on her own to organize that. So that was really great. We also have businesses like Park Place Mall, which do a lot of sustainability, both in their day-to-day operations, but also when they're doing renovations and things like that. They're very conscious about reducing their waste and diverting everything they can.
The City of Lethbridge encourages everyone to participate in events and take time to consider new waste reduction strategies in their everyday lives. Now, speaking of superheroes, many can be found in the Bible. Julia Ball is a pastor in Newfoundland and author of the book Conquering Fear. Julia says it's nice to enjoy the superheroes on the big screen, but we should not forget about the real-life superheroes as well.
Sometimes when I teach the Bible to kids, it seems so boring in comparison to Spider-Man or Superman or one of those heroes that is out there. So I think it's important for us to allow kids to see that unlike so many superhero stories, the stories of the Bible are actually true. They are actually things that really happen, and they're stories of God's power enabling people like me and you, and ultimately God's power through Jesus enabling people to do extraordinary things.
Watch the full interview with Ms. Ball discussing how kids can embrace real-life superheroes. That's coming up in the second half of our show. The curling community in Saskatchewan is mourning after the sudden death of Allie Jenkins. The 30-year-old Jenkins, a member of Sherry Anderson's rink, died on Sunday during childbirth. Her husband, Scott Jenkins, says during labor, doctors determined amniotic fluid entered her bloodstream, which set off a rare amniotic embolism. He says she fought for 5 hours before her heart finally gave out. The baby girl named Sydney has been placed in neonatal intensive care. More than 200 years after its invention, the stethoscope is now being threatened by handheld devices that rely on ultrasound technology. As we hear in this next report, patients are now being helped with artificial intelligence and smartphone apps.
It's an iconic symbol of medicine. From kids' checkups to examining the elderly, the stethoscope is a mainstay tool for diagnosis. Doctors say it helps them feel connected to their patients. In 200 years of use, stethoscopes haven't changed that much. Recent studies have shown that doctors sometimes miss heart sounds because of noise or inexperience. Now, new high-tech rivals have some debating if the stethoscope is becoming obsolete.
I'm afraid the old stethoscope is kind of falling on hard times in terms of rigorous training.
Doctors in Chicago are testing digital stethoscopes that connect wirelessly to smartphones, so heart sounds can be seen and heard.
We record the sounds of the heart and upload it to the cloud, where an artificial intelligence algorithm operates on it and tries to tell you, first of all, whether there is a murmur or not. And it now says that a murmur was detected.
The AI analysis is also being tested on a new digital stethoscope equipped with EKG monitoring.
If they can get a better reading using the new technology, great.
Pocket-sized ultrasound devices that connect with smartphones or tablets are another alternative. They're helping train future physicians.
The ultrasound helps incredibly in our ability to take a peek under the skin into the body. We have the ability to use the ultrasound to look at the heart, not just listen to it with a stethoscope. So in looking at the heart, we can see how well the heart squeezes, how well the heart valves move, whether they're moving normally.
Some doctors predict that handheld ultrasound and similar devices will become routine in physical exams within 10 years. But not all doctors are ready to hang up their stethoscopes.
Well, I see that I'm going to have my stethoscope in one pocket and my ultrasound machine in the other.
Mixing tradition with innovation to improve medical care. Lindsay Tanner, Associated Press.
U.S. President Donald Trump says he's lifting sanctions on Turkey after Ankara agreed to stop fighting Kurdish forces in Syria. Trump said others should fight over this long and blood-stained sand.
Over the last 5 days, you have seen that a ceasefire that we established along Syria's border has held, and it's held very well, beyond most expectations. Early this morning, the government of Turkey informed my administration that they would be stopping combat and their offensive in Syria and making the ceasefire permanent, and it will indeed be permanent.
The class of 2019 was welcomed to the Canadian Sports Hall of Fame. Freestyle skier Alex Bilodeau, along with hockey players Martin Brodeur and Jana Hefford, were just a few of the names of those who were being inducted.
Because Canada Sports Hall of Fame is national, we represent all sports and we represent all Canadians, so diversity and accessibility. We probably have 250 or 60 nominations that our selection committee has to go through. It's a tough process. I would never want the job, but they do a great job every year, and they come up with some Hall of Famers that are being inducted for more than their sports accomplishments, and that's the key for us.
It means a lot. I think it's so different than other accolades that you get, just because it's through sports in Canada, and obviously like playing hockey always narrow your focus on the sport that you play. But when you get inducted in Canada Sports Hall of Fame like that, I mean, it's such a big variety of sports, and so to be part of that, it's quite an honor.
Congrats to all of the inductees. We had a cooler day in the Windy City, but fortunately warmer temperatures are on the way. Complete weather details are coming up. We had clouds mixed with sun today and cooler. Tonight partly cloudy with a low near -3. Tomorrow mostly sunny with a high expected near 13. Even warmer on Friday with a high of 18 degrees in the forecast. A cool weekend is shaping up. Expect a mainly cloudy day and 3 degrees on Saturday. Overcast and only 4 degrees on Sunday. Monday more clouds rolling in with a high of 1. Sunny and 7 degrees for Tuesday. Looking at the almanac, the average high for this time of year is 12 degrees and an average low of -1. The highest temperature on this date was recorded in 1965 at 27 degrees, and the record low was a chilly -13 in 1991. Sunrise was at 8:05, sunset at 6:26. Looking at tomorrow's national forecast now, Victoria will be mainly cloudy and 12. Expect lots of cloud cover and 13 for Vancouver. Partly cloudy and 16 degrees for Calgary. Overcast and 12 for Edmonton. Expect a mixture of sun and cloud and 5 degrees for Regina on Thursday. Cloudy and 6 degrees for Saskatoon. It should be mainly sunny and 3 degrees in Winnipeg. Expect light rain at 15 in Toronto tomorrow. Showers and 13 in both Ottawa and Montreal. In the Maritimes, Fredericton, New Brunswick should be mainly sunny and 14 tomorrow. Clearing and 15 degrees for Halifax, Nova Scotia. Lots of sunshine at 13 at Charlottetown PEI. And in St. John's, Newfoundland, expect rain and a high near 10 degrees for tomorrow. The Canadian Federation of Agriculture is calling on the new Trudeau government to make farm issues a priority. President Mary Robinson says regardless of political ideology, all MPs should understand that the agriculture sector is a key driver to the Canadian economy. She says there are key issues which require political oversight. They include trade disruptions, business risk management tools, and climate change mitigation. Robinson says she wants Ottawa to come up with a new comprehensive labour program for agriculture and agri-food. The Federation says it represents close to 200,000 Canadian farmers and farm families. A slowing global economy is having a big impact on Caterpillar. The farm and construction equipment supplier says its profits and revenue slid in the third quarter. Dealers slashed inventories by about $400 million US, hinting at a pullback in spending by businesses. Overall, Caterpillar's revenue and sales have declined about 6% for the year. Boeing is reporting a big profit shortfall for the third quarter after costs related to the troubled 737 MAX jets rose by $900 million US. The U.S.-based company says net income was $1.17 billion, with adjusted earnings of $1.45 per share. That was far short of Wall Street's expectations of $2.04. Boeing did say it expects the 737 MAX jets to return to service by the end of the year and that it will gradually increase 737 production by late 2020. British Prime Minister Boris Johnson has accepted that the UK's exit from the European Union could be delayed beyond October 31st. The EU is considering whether to postpone the UK's departure after British lawmakers blocked Johnson's attempt to fast-track his Brexit bill through Parliament. Johnson says he believes the UK should leave the EU on October 31st, but has sent an email to Conservative Party supporters acknowledging the deadline is beyond reach and blaming the opposition Labour Party. Now, here's a look at today's markets. The TSX was down almost 56 points on the day to 16,335. The Dow was up close to 46 points to 26,833. The Nasdaq was up almost 16 points to 8119. The S&P 500 was up almost 9 points to 3,004. Oil was up $1.40 on the day to $55.88 per barrel. Natural gas was up a penny to $2.28. Gold was up 74 cents to $14.9289 per ounce. And silver was unchanged on the day at $17.55 an ounce. Wheat is at $219 per metric ton. Barley's at $218, canola's at $4.61, and corn is at $288 per metric ton. Live cattle was up 33 cents to $110.45. Feeder cattle was up $1.33 to $145.10. Lean hogs were up 33 cents to $66.98. The Canadian dollar was down slightly on the day to 76.49 US. Recapping one of our top stories this hour, police in the United Kingdom have launched a murder investigation after 39 people were found dead in a truck container. Authorities say they were found in an industrial park in Essex, which is located about 30 kilometers east of London. One of the victims was a teenager and what is suspected as a human trafficking ring. Police say the Bulgaria-registered vehicle had entered the UK through a Welsh port over the weekend. Police later said only the truck and not the container had originated in Northern Ireland. The 25-year-old Northern Irish truck driver was arrested on suspicion of murder. According to one of our regular political contributors, Brian Lilly, Alberta's separation sentiment is higher now more than ever. Mr. Lilly will explain why next. But first, here's a look at what's happening in and around your community.
Here is your Bridge City News community calendar. The Galt Museum and Archives is hosting a Halloween spooktacular on Saturday, October 26th from 1 to 4 p.m. Come for a family-friendly afternoon where you can play games, decorate a pumpkin, make a trick-or-treat bag, and other fun crafts. Plus, go on a tour of the building, hear spooky ghost stories, and enjoy free popcorn and caramel apple slices. Admission is free. For details, visit galtmuseum.com. Pitcher Butte Trinity United Church is holding its annual Fall Beef Supper fundraiser on Sunday, October 27th from 5 to 7 p.m. at the Pitcher Butte Community Center. Dine in or take out. Tickets are $20 and are available at the door. To purchase your tickets in advance, visit the Pitcher Butte Municipal Library. Begin your Christmas shopping by coming to the Signatures Fall into Christmas event, November 1st to 3rd at Exhibition Park North Pavilion. Browse this unique handmade market featuring works of over 100 artists, artisans, makers, and designers from coast to coast. Admission is $5. Those 17 and under can enter for free. For more information, visit fallintochristmas.com. And that's your Bridge City News community calendar.
As you've heard on Bridge City News, the Liberals won a minority government, even though the Conservatives won more of the popular vote. But what mattered most is the Liberals took the most seats. One of our regular political contributors, Brian Lilly, joins me once again from Toronto. Brian, you called for a Conservative minority, but the Liberals snuck in. What happened?
Well, everybody got it wrong, and we can, speak more in depth about the polls later on. But what happened was the NDP vote was not there. The Liberals had a great ground game in Ontario. A lot of what people had been predicting in the Atlantic provinces, in Quebec, across Western Canada, including straight into BC, where it was a 3 and sometimes 4-way race, that all played out. But nobody predicted, or few predicted, that the Liberals were going to come away with just 1 seat less than they won in 2015. Remember, 2015 was a bit of a wave election. The Liberals came from 3rd place to take 184 seats, and that included 80 in Ontario. At my last count, there were 79 seats that they took. That's more than they had when Parliament, broke for the election. So, it was a gain for the Liberals in Ontario, and the Conservatives couldn't deliver. In fact, even popular former cabinet ministers, deputy leader of the party, Lisa Raitt, going down in defeat. An awful lot of other candidates that had high hopes going down in defeat as well. So a big night for the Liberals, a bad night for the Conservatives, and a disappointing night for the NDP. Great, though, if you're the Bloc Québécois leader.
Brian, there's more Alberta separation sentiment setting in now that Trudeau and the Liberals are back in. You recently wrote about this. Is the noise that's coming from the prairies being heard in central Canada?
Well, it's being heard by some people and dismissed by others. I don't understand how people in central Canada, who are often so attuned, right here in Ontario, people start talking about Quebec separatism. They get very worried. They're concerned about national unity. Let's do what we can to keep Quebec in. People in Alberta and Saskatchewan are upset. To heck with them. Let them keep their oil. We don't want it. Well, they seem to want the oil money. And in fact, Alberta Premier Jason Kenney, in a letter that he sent to the Prime Minister Trudeau on Tuesday, day after the election, said just that. Let me read you just one line from this 5-page letter. He says, Albertans cannot understand why they have been called on to contribute $20 billion more annually to the government of Canada than they receive back in benefits, and yet our ability to develop that wealth is increasingly blocked through cancelled and killed pipelines and policies like Bill C-69. And of course, Trudeau's star candidate out of Montreal, Stephen Guilbeault, former Greenpeace activist, says there's not going to be any more pipelines, not even Trans Mountain. That's not compatible with their goals for 2030. So some people are getting it, some people are not. The alarm is being sounded. Saskatchewan Premier Scott Moe says there's a prairie fire burning that Trudeau needs to put out. And in his letter says, I've given you the fire extinguisher. Look after our concerns. But I'm not sure that the people in power will get that. And I'm definitely convinced that the coalition partners that Justin Trudeau is going to have to look for will not get that. They believe no more pipelines, leave the oil in the ground.
No more pipelines with Bill C-69 is giving rise to a lot more of the sentiment of Western separation, especially here in Alberta. So, Brian, what do the election results mean for the federal party leaders? Will Trudeau, Scheer, or Jagmeet Singh see challenges to their leadership?
Well, Justin Trudeau definitely won't, even though he did lose almost 30 seats from the last election result, 184 down to 157. That's a significant drop. He also dropped about 6 percentage points in terms of the popular vote across the country. This is the government. My understanding is this is the government that has had the lowest percentage of the popular vote ever, and yet is still able to hold on to power, just due to weird seat splits in Ontario and how things went down. So Justin Trudeau is going to be safe. Had he lost power, there probably would have been rumblings for him to go. Andrew Scheer is going to face an automatic leadership renewal review. Will he survive it? I don't know. Some knives are already out for the Conservative leader, and some people are saying, well, if we just elect a more moderate leader, then we would win. I don't buy that. You can be the most moderate Conservative ever. Once you are threatening to take power from the Liberals, you will be described, could have been Ron Ambrose, could have been Peter MacKay, could have been anybody. They would still be described as a far-right, fire-breathing, social conservative dragon that must be slayed to save the country. They would have run the same campaign against them. Maybe a different leader would have had a better chance communicating but it would have been the same campaign. They do it to Doug Ford in Ontario all the time, and he's not socially conservative. So that's my advice to the party if they decide to dump Scheer. That could happen in the next couple of months. Jagmeet Singh, believe it or not, despite going from 39 seats down to 24, New Democrats are saying this is a win. The guy's expectations, because he'd been such a bump on a log until the campaign began, nobody had high hopes for him. And so 24 seats, even though he lost all but one of the 14 he had in Quebec and didn't do as well as expected in places like British Columbia, this is a win. Only in NDP land is going from 39 to 24 seats a victory.
The federal Tories went up or held steady in every region of the country except for one, Ontario. Brian, was it really the Ford factor?
I think the Ford factor was definitely part of it, but not in the way that a lot of people think. There's been this push to say that Doug Ford was scaring off moderate voters and conservative voters. And, when you look at the percentage of the vote that Scheer was able to get in Ontario, across the province, it was about 33%. You go into some other areas like Oshawa, where the GM plant is, made the news quite a bit over the last year. That was about 39% voting for the Conservatives. And towards Eastern Ontario, the same thing, high 30s, low 40s in terms of support. But in Toronto in particular, and in that mythical 905 belt, there were a lot of people on the progressive side who were looking at the NDP and decided, we're going to move. Why did those vote splits go the way they do? In my view, two reasons. The NDP surge that happened, that put them up to 15 to 20%, depending on the poll, kind of broke in two ways because they only got about 16% of the vote. I would say about half of that extra didn't show up. They just didn't bother going to the polls. The NDP didn't have the resources. We talk about getting out the vote, how important this is to parties. The Liberals were very good at getting out their vote, in particular in Ontario. That means knocking on people's door at dinner time and saying, have you voted? Hal, can I take you to a polling station? Calling you until you say, look, I voted already. Leave me alone. That's what it takes. The Liberals did very well. The Conservatives, okay. The NDP didn't have the resources. The other part is the other half that had been part of this, I'm going to vote NDP, but then didn't. I believe that they folded in behind the Liberals as part of a Stop Scheer campaign. So the harping on Doug Ford may not have scared away people that voted Ford the last time, but it did scare people that voted NDP provincially and said, I don't want to go for that again. I'll vote Liberal this time.
So, Brian, Justin Trudeau is back in with the Liberals, with the government, the minority government. What does this really mean for the fight over the carbon tax with the various provinces? Catherine McKenna has already said the federal levy will be brought into Alberta in January.
Jason Kenney, the Alberta Premier, is still saying that he's going to fight it. And of course, he's been supportive of Ontario and Saskatchewan's court case. Those cases will go on. Blaine Higgs from New Brunswick had said that he was going to fight it, but he's been waffling ever since. At one point, he was going to launch his own court case. Then he said he wouldn't. I can't remember if he joined with Saskatchewan or Ontario's case, but now he's saying, well, I'll find a different way to charge emitters. And so he's looking at a different model. Ontario's Doug Ford had said, look, this case is going to be decided at the polls, not at the courts. He said that at the end of August, and a lot of people took that to mean that if the Liberals won, he would just give up. I took it to mean, hey, the Conservatives are going to win, and we won't have to deal with this anymore. The Conservatives did not win, and the Liberals did very well in Ontario. But still today, his office saying that, we're continuing to have discussions, but the court case will go on. So 2 court cases so far. We'll see if Jason Kenney in Alberta launches a third court case. Those are all headed to the Supreme Court, should be heard within the next year.
Elizabeth May and the Green Party did not have the big breakthrough they were looking for. The People's Party as well, they didn't even win a seat, including their leader, Maxime Bernier's. Brian, does that mean potentially the end of the PPC?
It does potentially mean the end of the PPC. They don't have a single representative. And, I'm sitting not far from one of the seats that they claimed they had the potential to win, Etobicoke North, because the sister-in-law of Ontario Premier Doug Ford and the widow of late Toronto Mayor Rob Ford had agreed to run for them. But I still don't think Renata Ford got above 3% of the vote in that riding. So, they really didn't have a shot. Maxime Bernier was their only legitimate shot. And he lost his seat in the Beauce region of Quebec at South Quebec City along that Quebec New England border. I believe it borders mostly with Maine. He lost that seat handily. It was more than 10 percentage points separating him and the new MP for the area, Richard Leou. That is shocking. And it wasn't because there was a second guy named Maxime Bernier running. If you remember, the Rhinoceros Party, in a bit of mischief, found another guy in Quebec named Maxime Bernier and had him run in the riding. Even if you added both their votes together, they still would have lost. The Bernier name has been synonymous with that riding for a long time. Maxime himself has held it since 2006. His father held it for years before that. So this is a big loss for him and his party, and I think there's a good chance that they will fade away. If not, they'll probably just remain on the fringes.
Now, Brian, you wrote a lot about polling with the Toronto Sun. You spoke with various pollsters all throughout the campaign. How can so many people get it so wrong? And should we ever believe anything that the polls have to say?
I still think that polling is a valuable tool, especially during elections, and it tells you where trends are going. But none of them are bragging today, I was the most accurate pollster. In the past, they have been able to get it within a percentage point or even less in terms of the popular vote breakout of various parties. This time, there were polls going in right up until the end saying it's a dead heat. It's tied. It's 31-31. And of course, it ended up at about 34.5 for the Conservatives and 33 for the Liberals. So it wasn't a win at all for pollsters. But again, I think it was how that NDP vote broke out, because the NDP did a lot worse than people were expecting. And as I said, I think half of them that said they were going to vote NDP but didn't, they just didn't show up at the polls, and the other half decided they were going to back the Liberals. I think that's what it all comes down to, but there's going to be an awful lot of hand-wringing by the polling community and an awful lot of soul-searching to say, okay, did we miss a wave this time? One last mention of polls. Daryl Bricker of Ipsos said that they did, I think it was around 10,000, 9 to 10,000 people did an exit poll with them after they voted. And 7% said that they'd made up their mind in the ballot box. And an awful lot of them said they went in thinking, I'm leaning towards Jagmeet Singh in the NDP, and they came out having voted Liberal.
Brian, SNC-Lavalin shares shot up, so obviously the markets think the Liberal win is good for the company. Does this potentially mean a deal is happening?
Well, obviously the markets think a deal of some sort will happen. Will it be a deferred prosecution agreement? Will they change the law to allow the company to continue to bid on federal contracts, even if they're found guilty? I don't know. The Liberals have never taken it off the table. Even with all the controversy surrounding that earlier in the year, they never took that possibility off the table during the election. And in fact, the Prime Minister even said during the, I believe it was the English language debate, I watched all three. Actually, I watched all four. I believe it was the English language debate, though. He still claimed that the Globe and Mail story, the original one, was false. He'd admitted previously that it was, after much investigation, he admitted that it was true, but it was okay. They changed their tune and were doubling down. So I wouldn't be surprised if there is a deferred prosecution agreement. But I bet we'd have to wait a couple of months to find that out for sure.
One more thing I want to chat with you about. Jane Philpott out, Jody Wilson-Raybould in. Your thoughts? Any surprises there?
No, that's exactly how I expected it to go in terms of which of the two women running as independents would win. Jane Philpott was in a tougher race because the Liberals put up an experienced Ontario cabinet minister who'd been elected in that very area for many years at the provincial level. The Conservatives had won that riding many times, and they had high hopes that, okay, if Helen Jassic, who they brought in as their candidate for the Liberals, split the vote, the Liberal vote with Jane Philpott, while the Tories would walk up the middle and take the riding back. They'd only lost it in 2015. That didn't happen. The Liberals still won there. But Jody Wilson-Raybould had a lot of support from across the country. She will now potentially be a thorn in the side of the Trudeau government. But I also do expect that on most things, she's going to vote with them still.
But what's interesting is the fact you've got an independent candidate there, but they don't have a party backing them. So what kind of clout or power will she actually have in Ottawa?
Not a lot. Independents generally don't. Elizabeth May's been there a long time. She doesn't get to speak all that often. She doesn't get committee appearances. She doesn't get to chair committees. They will occasionally allow independents to sit in and ask questions, but they're not allowed to vote. So it's going to be difficult for her to make her voice heard. And we'll see if voters return Jody Wilson-Raybould if she decides to run again the next time we go to the ballot box, which could be in a couple of months, could be several years from now. We'll have to wait and see.
One of our regular political reporters, Brian Lilly, joining me once again from Toronto. Thanks so much, Brian.
Thank you, Hal.
It seems today's children have more fear and worry about than a lot of past generations. Perhaps it's a little to do with being focused on superheroes more than ever before, DC Comics and Marvel. Joining me now via Skype from Clarenville, Newfoundland, about 2 hours west of St. John's, is Julia Ball, a children's and families pastor and author of Conquering Fear. Julia, welcome to BCN.
Hi, thanks for having me.
So what is your book Conquering Fear all about? I'm guessing conquering fear might be a good start.
Yeah, you got it. So it's a devotional for kids ages 10 to 12, basically based on the fact that Jesus is the ultimate superhero and he can help us conquer fear.
So in what ways does his life look like the superheroes of today's movies and comics?
Well, of course, on a kid's level, we would say that Jesus had the best superpowers ever. He could heal, he could do miracles, he could do anything. And of course, he cared for the vulnerable. We know that superheroes always take care of the weaker, the lesser of society, and Jesus did that all throughout his life.
So why do you think we are really drawn to ordinary human beings who have extraordinary powers?
I think all of us love a good underdog story. We all love to see people who are ordinary every day who can do incredible things. And I think there's a draw in all of us to want to be able to do that too. All of us would love to be able to do something super for someone else. And so I think all of us have that draw towards that superhero story.
Julia, the Bible includes the stories of multiple heroes. How can we really teach our kids to embrace real-life heroes?
Well, I think that it's a challenge because in today's world, there are so many heroes that kids are drawn to. Sometimes when I teach the Bible to kids, it seems so boring in comparison to Spider-Man or Superman or one of those heroes that is out there. So I think it's important for us to allow kids to see that unlike so many superhero stories, the stories of the Bible are actually true. They are actually things that really happen, and they're stories of God's power enabling people like me and you, and ultimately God's power through Jesus enabling people to do extraordinary things.
Should we also maybe direct our kids away from celebrities and maybe sports stars for heroes, and maybe have them go look more towards pastors, firefighters, police officers, doctors, people who are saving lives or maybe putting their own lives on the line?
Absolutely. I think it's a reminder for me as a children's pastor that God uses ordinary people, people who maybe don't have superpowers like those we might see on TV or in movies, but people who are real life, everyday, ordinary people who are doing extraordinary things. So absolutely, I think we should direct our children's attention there.
What do superheroes really have to do with helping us conquer fear?
It's a good question. I don't feel like a superhero most days, and I'm sure most kids don't. However, a reminder that there is a superhero, God in Jesus, who we can trust in, who we can hold on to, who we can put our ultimate life and our security in, is a reminder that we don't have to be afraid, that no matter what the world throws at us, we have a hero that we can count on.
Why do you think it is, Julia, that a narrative in most superhero stories have to involve both a good and evil character?
Well, it makes for a good story, that's for sure. But I think that a part of it is that we all know this story of good and evil that exists in our world. We see it, we're familiar with it all the time. Even if we don't have words for it, lots of kids don't have the words for it, but we know that there are good things, there are bad things that are happening in our world. And I think ultimately all of us are drawn to that, the idea of someone conquering, having victory over evil or bad situations.
I recently saw the movie Maleficent, and it actually shows the story of one person who's both good and evil. Maybe that also talks about our own inner struggles. What are your thoughts with that?
Yeah, I would think so. I mean, I believe that all of us have a struggle between what's right and what's wrong, kids included. And so I think that we all have this pull inside of us, this tension that we just can't quite figure out. And so I think it's a reminder that, and the goal of the book is to remind kids that, we all struggle with good and evil. There's inner tension between all of us, but we can ultimately put our trust in God who can help us fight that battle.
As a children and families pastor, what do you find are some of the greatest fears or struggles young people face today?
I think that we live in a world, and stats would tell us this, that kids face more fear than ever. They are afraid of all sorts of things. I recently taught a children's church class where a little girl told me she's scared of everything. Their kids are scared of loss. Kids are scared of families splitting up. Kids are scared of what the future will hold. They're scared of what school will happen, if they'll be good enough, if they'll be popular enough, if they'll be brave enough. I think that our world is so open and accessible to kids today that the levels of fear they have are rising.
Let me ask you something. I remember when I was a child, kids can be so cruel. And even today, like with my children as they were growing up, their friends were even crueler than some of their enemies. Why is it that kids can be so cruel? And why do other children put so much stock into the opinion of children instead of their leaders or their parents?
I think all of us put a lot of stock into what our peers think. Even as an adult, a peer's opinion means a lot to me. And I think that kids are still learning. We talked about that tension a few minutes ago, that tension between us, between the right thing and the wrong thing to do. And I think so often kids, they still do the wrong thing. They're still learning what that looks like. And so I think they have a tendency to be cruel. They have a tendency to not do that right thing and that kind thing. And it ends up with a lot of kids being hurt, a lot of kids facing fears of what their peers are going to think. And so I think for all of these kids, it's just a real struggle. It's a battle for them. And I think that it can be overwhelming for them at times.
There are peer pressures, also online bullying, which we see a lot of as well. So how do you think as a parent and maybe leader we should attack something like that or approach that?
Well, I think that there's a practical answer and then there's a little bit more of a theological answer. The practical answer is to remind our kids that they're not alone, to have the tough conversations about what things they are scared of, that the world can be cruel, life can be tough, and to have those conversations with them on a regular basis, to let them know that we're in their corner, we have their back, we want to support them. I think the more theological answer is to remind kids that God is on their side, that He's with them, that He wants to help them overcome their fear, to face these tough situations, that they're never alone.
And He is with us each and every step of the way. Now, Julie, at a time when people are in positions of authority, they're often mocked and ridiculed. Do you think we need real-life heroes to look up to?
Absolutely. I think all of us are searching for that real-life hero, someone we can admire, someone that will stand the test and won't let us down. We all are looking for a real-life hero.
Now, your book is really about communicating a basic understanding of who God is and what He's like. Why did you choose that particular format?
I think that it's easy to just tell kids not to be scared, to tell them they don't need to be worried, to tell them there's nothing to be scared of, that they can be brave, that they can be bold. But as a Christian, I ultimately believe that fear fades away in the light of who God is and understanding the truth of who He is. So instead of simply telling kids not to be scared or to stand up to fear, I wanted to give them a true understanding of who God is, how amazing He is, how much He loves them, how much He desires to be a part of their lives. Because I believe that as kids start to understand that they'll begin to conquer fear. So instead of starting with the problem, I wanted to start with the solution. And once kids grasped that goodness, that greatness of God, I felt like they would be able to conquer fear in their lives.
What do you think parents and maybe churches are doing well or not so well to help future generations know and understand God?
I can only speak from my own experience, but I think one thing that churches are doing really well is giving kids lots of information. We live in a world where there are so many resources, where there are so many opportunities for kids to learn and to grow and to understand. And I see kids in my own ministry, in my own church, who have such a great grasp of who God is. They're understanding the Bible. They're understanding what God is doing in their lives and in the world. So I give props to churches who are doing that and who are doing that well. I think sometimes, though, what is missing is that opportunity to experience that or test it out for themselves, for kids to learn, why does this matter? How does this apply to my life? What does this look like in my everyday experience? I think they have the knowledge, but figuring it out how it applies to their lives can be a challenge.
Do you ever talk to children as well, Julie, about the difference between being afraid and fear?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that, and there's a quote that I love that says, courage is just fear that has said its prayers. I think that all of us have moments in our lives when we are afraid. It's normal, it's part of being human. And we can't deny that. We can't tell kids to never be afraid because we all get scared at times. However, I think that there's a difference in fear that paralyzes us, that keeps us from doing what it is that we desire to do, from stepping out in faith, from even doing ordinary everyday things like going to school or spending time with friends. And so I think kids need to understand that difference.
Let's talk about how you organized the book to help keep readers engaged for an entire year.
Yeah, so the book is divided into 52 weeks, and each week is composed of 2 devotionals that kids and their parents can sit down and read. It unpacks a Bible story or a truth about God, and then it's accompanied by 4 activities. So those activities are ways that kids can have that experience I talked about earlier, to not just know, but to really get their hands, in some ways literally dirty, through science and crafts and cooking and all these sorts of things, to really experience the truth. So we start right at the beginning about who Jesus is, why he came, his life on earth, move into why that matters for our lives, and how we can live as heroes in light of Jesus, the ultimate hero.
What do you see are some of the fundamental differences of fear, what adults compared to children really fear today? Maybe kids, it's peer pressure. Adults is a fear of maybe disappointing God. Like, what are you hearing right now when you talk to both?
Yeah, I think that there are some that are really common. I think kids and adults are all scared about the future, about what tomorrow is going to hold. But for kids, it's a little more immediate. Kids are scared about what's going to happen next week, what's going to happen tomorrow at school, what's going to happen over the summer when I don't get to see my friends. Whereas adults are thinking a little more long term. What's going to happen 5 years from now? What's going to happen 10 years from now? I need long term plans. So I think that's one big difference. I think another thing is that kids are scared of everyday things that maybe as adults we've learned to cope with a little bit. Social interactions. I know so many kids who get nervous when they have to talk to someone new or make a phone call or sit in a group and answer questions, whereas adults, maybe we're nervous about it, but we've learned to cope a little bit. So I think kids have more everyday fear, if that makes sense.
What do you hope both kids and adults alike will take away from reading or studying Conquering Fear?
I hope that they'll realize that fear is a part of life, but it doesn't have to control us. In each week of the book, I include what's called a fear buster. So it's just a simple reminder of something that God can do in our lives when we're afraid. So, when I'm asking hard questions, when I don't know what to do, I can remember that God is the one who holds all the answers. So I hope kids who read the book and adults who read it along with them are reminded that fear is a part of life. But because of Jesus, because he is the ultimate superhero, as I say time and time again in my book, we don't have to let fear control us, but we can move forward into the plan God has for our lives.
Julia Ball, a children and families pastor and author of Conquering Fear. Thanks a lot for joining me today from Newfoundland.
Thank you so much.
On behalf of all of us here at Bridge City News, I'm Hal Roberts. God bless. Thanks for watching.